from Disney.
A lot of people want to know about my family. Well, we have a magical house and magic gifts.
What's your gift?
Mirabel didn't get one.
This Thanksgiving,
Casita?
The family is in danger.
I'm losing my gift!
It's all gonna come down to you.
I can do this. And at least I'll have a friend. Nope, he flew away immediately. Quitter!
Disney's Encanto. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters Thanksgiving.
Welcome to Foundation and Podcast, the officially unofficial podcast for Foundation on Apple TV+. This episode, we're considering feedback for Season 1, Episode 6, Death and the Maiden. Respect and enjoy the podcast. All right, Aaron, we have feedback, or so I hear.
Yeah, also, I kind of want to start debuting a feature where I want to kind of discuss some of the stuff that's come up on the official podcast, because that's a fascinating project in its own right. I don't have a name for this. We need a name for it, like Gabbing with Goyer Corner.
Sure.
The Concepcion Inception after Jason's role in it. I don't know. But here's the things I thought were interesting coming out of the podcast. If you have any, feel free to join in. But there's a really fascinating tidbit from David's early life where he talks about being a 10-year-old in some sort of Jewish school system. And talking with the rabbi, there's like an opportunity to talk about life on other planets. And he started, propounding the rabbi with questions about, like, well, suppose there's a planet, and it's populated by intelligent octopuses. Would those octopus people practice Judaism? And it's like, and I remember it reminded me of, like, did you ever have any debates with the cooler elders in our congregation about extraterrestrial life? Do you remember the?
No. A lot of debates about God and the limitations of it, but sure, no, none of those.
I had one elder that said something that I remember. It stuck with me. That's like, well, okay. If there was intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy, then God obviously created it, right?
Of course.
And it would probably be perfect. And unless they had, then it turned into like a debate about whether that planet would also have a Satan that would have tempted them and fall, or whether there's like a celestial kind of group of like still perfect creation on other planets is watching us on Earth fucking. It's like, but I remember thinking about that the intersection between kind of like science fiction and religion. And I thought it was cool because also David revealed he grew up in a kind of divided. His dad, I think, was Catholic and his mom was Jewish, or maybe vice versa. So I always find people with those like borderlands, or people that have like had a lot of significant spiritual growth or questioning, they do really good with these kind of storylines. So yeah, maybe that explains it. He also he had this interesting comment about the life cycle, he called it, of the clones and their relationship with Demerzel. That they start off in Dawn, that they experience Demerzel as this mommy and nanny and teacher figure. And then when they become Day, she turns into the right-hand woman. He implied that it's not atypical for the Days to have a sexual relationship with Demerzel to consummate this kind of royal consort type of deal, which that blew my mind.
I wonder if
Day
that
also
makes it into the show. We'll see.
Yeah, if he's implying it, I feel like there's going to be some creepy scenes, some creepy Game of Thrones type scenes where it feels incestual. Even though strictly speaking, it's not. Day, he also says that Day starts to grow resentful at this period because he starts feeling his, own mortality and also realizing the limitations of who he is as an individual. Like, Demerzel is always there to remind him of, like, you don't matter as much as the Empire matters, and you always have to kind of keep that stuff in mind. And he chafes against that. But then as they evolve in the dusk, they fall in love with Demerzel, like in a deep, compatible way, and truly starts to appreciate her role that they play in their life, just as she's there to usher them off into darkness. So I thought that's interesting things to look for.
For sure. I'm looking forward to seeing some of that stuff on screen. I will say also that that's how it's been for the last 14 generations. Who knows how it's going to be going forward?
True.
Though.
That's true. The colorblind stuff's throwing everything into question.
Mm-hmm.
He also had the inspiration for the commander figure that survives a wreck of the jump ship. Their pod was inspired by Donald Pleasant's escape from his plane wreck in the movie Escape from New York.
Okay, I have not seen that.
Yeah. It's a interesting John Carpenter film. You haven't seen it, but I thought that was pretty funny that they were like sweating, like, well, how are they going to have this guy? He's like, it's easy. Donald Pleasant's Escape from New York. Just pop him in a capsule and shoot him out. Jason, the main host, I guess the moderator of the podcast, asked him a question about luminism, because he says we've seen one religious movement in this galaxy on Synax be violently anti-technology and, anti-intellectualism. And he asked if we're supposed to like kind of see that commonality in religion. He said, no, luminism is actually embracing technology. They have starships of their own. But it's just like you're seeing them at the core. This is like the Holy Land.
Gotcha.
Like you'd have, so like this is the Salt Palace, and like they restrict, kind of like you have to put your cell phones in boxes, he said, like, when you go to pay homage to or make a pilgrimage here.
Yeah.
So that explains why, it's not just 3 trillion followers, but they also probably have commiserate military, industrial, and economic might to go along with that too. They're not backwaters.
Huh. Interesting. I guess I hadn't considered that they would have military might of any kind.
We didn't. Those are my words. I'm just saying that,
Okay.
like, the implication, if they haven't technology, then, like, even if the empire is a monopoly on force, it's probably something that's like a legal thing rather than like, oh shit, we just can't figure out how to make guns kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
He also said that Jason was talking with him about the spacers, the weird engineered humans that kind of like babysit everybody in hyperspace. And he said they experience hyperspace as a cross between a religious experience and like an MDMA trip.
Okay.
So I don't know how a normal human would experience, but that's how he described the spacers. And the other one, so I was taken with his suggestion that the vault was like this Borges novel, or this short story, the Library of Babel. And I completely forgot that all the podcast up to this, every time Jason asks him what's in the vault, he gives some kind of smart ass crazy answer to it. So he gave the one kind of like straight up, oh, here's a serious literary reference, and I just ran with it. And then this episode, he asked him again, what's the vault? And I'm like, what? That's interesting. And he goes, oh, it's the ice cave from the Sasquatch episode of $6 Million Man. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Have I literally checked out
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so does that mean it's the duality of man? You've got one that's a cyborg. He's fused with like $6 million of technology, but Sasquatch, that's like Aboriginal man almost, like free of any kind of technology or.
Yeah. So is one of the spacers in there? They're about $6 million worth of modifications, right?
At least. And they're just having an MDMA rave, apparently.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel maybe he's hiding one serious answer in all of the chaff that he's firing in response to Jason's insistent question of what's in the vault. Or maybe not.
I mean, that one's such a cool concept, though, that library.
It is such a cool concept. And it's also telling because I don't know if this came up like in our actual interview or if this was in the before or after phase of it, but he seemed to take it kind of semi-serious when we were like, bringing it up in conversations. And so maybe that is, or maybe this is hilarious to him that, we're these podcasters and we haven't gotten the joke of their podcast 6 episodes in. So I could go either way. All I know is I found the one English translation of this Argentinian.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, there's one copy floating around the Cincinnati library system, and I've got it as of last night.
I guess I can't read it. I did. I was looking around on the internet to try and find some stuff about Library of Babel, and I found libraryofbabel.info, which is a website that is exactly this. It's exactly the Library of Babel with the hexagonal rooms and all the shelves and all the random texts. It doesn't have like a full compilation of every text that is possible in that yet. I guess they're working on that. Although I don't know what that means because it's just an algorithm to generate all that. So it should be pretty much instant if you have the computing power.
Interesting.
But yeah, you can go there and just hit like a random book and it'll 99.999% of the time give you just a bunch of garbage. But then you can like search for specific phrases, and it's a really cool website, libraryofbabel.info.
Wow, that is interesting. The other thing I want before we move off the Goyer corner is one of the things we'd mentioned in the before we officially started the podcast. You know, he just kind of hopped on and we were kind of bullshitting back and forth for a couple of minutes, and we talked about some of the the COVID impact of Foundation. This is also something he mentioned. He did a Reddit AMA the week before we sat down with him to talk, and I pulled some information from that stuff. But it seems like a lot of the problems that we've had with this show in terms of like, oh man, those Anacreons, that initial charge into Terminus was kind of lame. Not sure of some of the storytelling and editing that went into some of that, Clark Peters stuff, some of the Terminus stuff from this episode. Maybe that was a little shaky. It seems that there were some big problems with like COVID impacting, like that they really wanted a much larger battle sequence, but the day they shot the Terminus side, the Devastation side, they were going under limitations of how many people they could have on the set, so they just couldn't have those big crowds. Also, that like Clark Peters, there's a whole lot of inside ball in between, like who's a main series regular, who is an also appearing, how many episodes you get them for. Like you get him for 5 episodes, 6 episodes. And I guess Clark Peters, they only had him, because they can't afford to pay everyone as main cast members. Very few shows can. That was an impact because when they had to shut down for COVID, I guess his contract allowed him to find other work, which he did, which then caused him a lot of filming problems trying to get him back to finish that story arc. So they kind of like stitched it together as best they could. But I don't know. Like I said, you guys got to keep in mind this is a showrunner that's talking about his own work and wanting to put the best face forward. But I kind of am inclined to it makes a lot of sense, I guess, on what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that feels like a reasonable explanation for why sometimes there's like stuff where the show nails and then other things they kind of stumble with. It's like there are limitations they face with this season. Now, going forward, we asked him, it's like, oh, probably smooth sailing for like season 2. You guys are probably no longer doing all the Zoom coordination. He's like, no, that they're still, Hollywood probably takes especially the above the line folks, pretty seriously. If you end up getting Lee Pace killed from some kind of myocardial fucking swelling or infarction or whatever related to COVID, there's probably some big money involved there. So it seems like Hollywood is very cautious about releasing some of these restrictions. Also, a lot of it is just getting people across borders. They're filming in different countries, and getting everybody through customs and stuff during this time is also challenging. So I guess the big point is if you're loving the show, it seems like each season we get a little bit further into, either living with the pandemic or getting post-pandemic. That stuff should get stronger. And if you like the show, except for you have a problem with a couple of scenes here and there, then you probably really like it going forward, because whether they're going to get workarounds to that or just, be free of the restrictions, it seems like that did unfortunately impact some of the storytelling. So take that for what you will. Anyway, if you would like to hear more from David Goyer and you don't want to wait till the end of the season, we did have a couple things that hit the cutting room floor. Like I said, the beginning conversation, we talk a little bit about the success of Dune and its budget versus Foundation's budget, and some more of that COVID restriction inside stuff. And we had to cut a couple questions too. If you want to hear all that stuff, there's probably 10, maybe 15 minutes of that. We're going to post it to our premium feeds. So if you're a patron or club member, you can check that out later this week. Here's what's coming this week for our club members, patrons, and Twitch subscribers. On Working Wednesdays, we are checking out The Last Duel, the medieval period piece written by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon and directed by Ridley Scott. Received strong reviews from critics and some buzz amongst film geeks, but its debut was something of a box office debacle. We'll try to figure out what gives, and you can watch us record live. Then stick around after as we pick out some fun streaming and ad music and revisit our pre-planning for 2022's Groundhog Day charity event.
This weekend, Marvel tries to get us to care about another team of heroes we've never heard of. Can they Guardians of the Galaxy the Eternals? Mere mortals receive a spoiler-free review of the film and a bit of trailer talk, but only true believers in the club or patrons can access our full spoiler-filled review out this Thursday night. Then this Friday, we'll be serving up lunch piping hot, streaming live from baldmove.com. If you can't make it, don't worry, we'll have a doggy bag waiting for you in podcast form.
Then this weekend, we're screening a much-loved movie from our past, the Emmerich and Devlin production of Stargate. Uber nerd James Spader and Uber Minch Kurt Russell square off against Egyptian gods from space. But before that, can Captain Picard survive being stuck in a turbolift with children? Can Lieutenant Worf survive the horrors of live human birth? Can Enterprise survive Counselor Troy taking over the bridge? Find out this Sunday. Star Trek starts at 8 p.m., then we step through the Stargate at 9 p.m. Eastern only on twitch.tv/baldmove. All right. Well, that's it for the Inception. We are going to move on to the feedback from you fine folks. Foundation@baldmove.com is how you send in feedback each week, and we will try to answer it. I also adapted a couple of the Goyer questions we couldn't get to that I thought maybe we could field. So I also did a little bit of that too, but this is largely feedback from 106, Death and the Maiden. First up is Devin. So am I the only one who found Hardin's visions of the Imperial Library and the boy outside the vault just to be plain silly? Furthermore, when I read the book a few years ago, I walked away with the understanding that if someone understands psychohistory, it changes their decision-making process and therefore throws off psychohistory's predictions. I assume this is also in the show, and that's probably why Raish killed Harry. The vault is sending some sort of visions to Hardin. Doesn't that undercut the same basic idea? So let's talk about the Hardin visions of the Imperial Library. Is it plain silly? I guess why I don't see it as plain silly. I mean, it's a science fiction concept, telekinesis and telepathy and empathy and all that stuff are long baked in. Like whether you're talking about Jedi Knights or Vulcans with the mind melds, like having humanity continue to evolve some sort of mental powers is part of the deep DNA of the series, or at least the genre.
Sure, and I don't know what the mechanism for it is yet, right? They haven't told us, is this some innate ability she has because of her birth, or is this some kind of like vault infused technology sort of thing? We don't know anything about it other than it's a power that she seems to have. So I'm waiting to reserve judgment. If this is like, oh, and she got this power from talking to the wood elves, maybe I won't be so excited about it, but I seriously doubt that's the case.
And also, like sometimes with science fiction, you want to know the answers too bad, and you wind up with midichlorians. Aren't you glad to know that the Force is generated by midichlorians? Doesn't that feel much more satisfying than the mystical monk answers we got in the previous movies? I know I love my midichlorians. I'm like, that's the tension in world building. Like, you want to feel like the world's real, but you know what's cool about the real world? There's always things that you can know and uncover. Sure. And if everything, like, it stops feeling real if you know the details about everything, right? So there's got to be some things to discover, uncover, learn. But your other point about psychohistory, that's my understanding too, that like people, it's just two parts of it, that like if enough of the population is aware of the fact that they're in some kind of equation, that the knowledge that they're being observed can like fucking taint the results. And also, people, more people that understand psychohistory and can run equations and stuff also somehow can screw up. But it's essentially something being aware of, it's being observation. It's like, if someone says, hey, just act natural. How fucking natural can you possibly act? versus someone in like a cloaking device filming you, literally being natural, not knowing that you're being recorded. That's the difference there. So
yeah, it's some like weird perverted Schrodinger's cat sort of thing, right? Where once the observer knows they're being observed, they can change the outcome of the observation. I don't know. I didn't get that from reading the first book, so I wonder if that's in subsequent books. I never I never understood that there was much of an opportunity to change things just by knowing that psychohistory is a thing. I understand like Harry can change things because he intimately understands psychohistory.
I think that might be a related concept. It's not just that the population at large is, but it's also the more people that understand it. And this is something that I think that is continuing to be a fundamental misunderstanding of the audience. You cannot predict individuals' behavior, but you can use an individual to nudge a variable. Like, Harry can't predict what the Emperor is going to do, but he can have himself killed, apparently by one of his acolytes, and plug that result, the founder of psychohistory being murdered by his disciple. And that input can be correctly modeled as to how the galaxy at large will react to those news. People that have started to believe in psychohistory, people who are, so that's the thing. It's like you can't predict individual behavior, but you can take individuals and tell them to do things that will alter the variables of how the board is set for psychohistory. And to me, that's very bright white line separating those two, predicting individuals. And having individuals act,
all acts, small and large, are individual acts, like, yes, you have a lot of people who can carry out those acts, like, let's say, going to war, but ultimately the decision comes down to a person, right? And so, that the larger effects are always, I don't want to say tainted, but always a result of individual actions.
Yeah. So that's the thing you always got to keep in mind, the difference between that and the individual actions versus individuals acting of their own accord with the understanding of psychohistory or under the direction of someone in psychohistory to alter how the universe is behaving. And it also seems like, just as a principle, people are probably more predictable when they're being given strong stimulus. Like, I don't know what Jim would do, but I probably know what Jim would do if Tack were to stick him in the ass right now, right? He'd jump out of his seat and go, ow, right? So like sometimes when you're, that's like why battlefield initiative is so important. You'd rather be fucking up shit and the other person like, oh my God, I can't believe my shit's being fucked up, I have to react to it, rather than just sitting there maybe planning to fuck your shit up. So I think there's a little bit of that in the psychohistory too.
Now that I'm thinking about it, more and more nowadays, individual actions aren't as important, right? We're in an age of social media. We're in an age of like distributed communication, and all of our logistics networks are just so intertwined, where like individual actions, like if I were to get on social media on let's say Facebook, Twitter, whatever, WhatsApp, and start posting, that's not going to make much of a difference. But if a million people get on WhatsApp and start posting about things, that can change the course of history. I wonder if they're going to play with any of those concepts, because so far, in this future world they've created, there is nothing like that, as best I can tell. It is driven by the acts of individuals. But that is certainly in our real world changing very rapidly. I wonder if that's going to come into the show.
Yeah, I mean, even democracy itself essentially boils us down into big aggregates of either majority or minority, right? And the majority, all the people comprised of the majority probably don't agree on much, but like we're treated as if we do for the sake of how government's going to go for the next 2 to 4 to 6 years. So
yeah, somewhat.
Yeah. Let's move on to Michael. Says, I read the Foundation series as a young man and have spent my career putting it into action. For more than 20 years, I have worked in digital marketing. We use as much data as we can consume to create behavior models. We got a budding psychohistorian here.
Yeah.
The science only works on masses of people. No marketing campaign targets individuals or small groups. I've used this also in consumer finance. We create messages that cause small shifts in buying behavior in large groups. I cannot make any one person buy anything, but I can goose sales by a percentage or two. I have friends who carve small basis points of investment performance based on enormous unstructured data feeds. They can't call individual stocks, but are accurate on overall markets or large sectors, especially in high-speed markets like derivatives. In politics, the game is to shift a few percentage points in target demographics. The Lincoln Project brags that they carved away a few percentage points from the suburban Republican base, especially women, in the 2020 election, which helped defeat Donald Trump. They make no pretense of influencing individual voters. The big attention attractors like Facebook and YouTube use the same playbook to maximize the time users spend on their platform while monetizing their insights to sell attractive targets to their customers, which are the advertisers. Once again, this only works on large groups. What Asimov predicted 80 years ago is what we do as routine today. I mean, yeah, and I feel like there's especially it feels like in the last 10 years, people are starting to be a little more Harry Seldonish, like not just taking insights about a community, but then taking that to feed back into the mechanism to get other insights, like, you know, how there's, you know, across the world, there is manipulation, election manipulation. There is people pushing false agendas, fake news, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I guess the only question is, like, as everyone starts to do it, does it kind of like cancel each other out as, like, you know, I don't know. Because it does sound like some pretty spooky. Someone alluded to in the interview with David Goyer, this article about this pine beetle ecologist that has gone on to study human ecology, and you know, he got big waves by saying, you know, if he's been saying for like the last 5 or 6 years that, you know, there's a model that leads to unrest building and it's going to peak in 2020 with chaos, and, you know, of course 2020 had a lot of chaos and systematic failures, so he's kind of riding high. But like, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of scary parallels here.
Sure. No, I look at data aggregation sort of as a pyramid, and like get all this data out there that's just raw data at the very bottom. And then as you start to analyze it and put it all together to form a shape, it sort of forms this pyramid where like one predictive engine can be right at the top, right? And it's the best predictive engine we have. Well, now if you suddenly have 600 other predictive engines doing the same thing, maybe getting slightly different results with different variables, then you could start to aggregate the data generated by those predictive engines into a higher level, like new top of the pyramid sort of thing. And that can almost seemingly go on forever. I don't know. It's an interesting concept. And we are, you know, in the computer age, where this stuff is just going to start, like computing power enable this sort of collection of data and sifting through it and understanding of it. We are just at the beginning of that. I mean, artificial intelligence is going to blow that door wide open, and it's already starting to. That's why you're seeing all this stuff. But we are just barely starting to get our heads around that.
Yeah, a lot of this, like, it reminds me of like some of the research like Joe Overton did. If you've heard of the Overton window, like it's a way to both you can use it to both quantify like where a population stands politically on different issues, but you can also, if you take it one step further and then like, well, how can I nudge the Overton window to make a policy more palatable? Like right now it's very unpopular for whatever reason because people see it as a radical idea. Well, how can I get it to accept it as, you know, incrementally to be, you know, go from the unthinkable to the thinkable? And they've, you know, been working on this people have been working on this for 30 plus years. And now you're really starting to bring, like Jim's was talking about, that, you know, big analytical data guns behind it. Really modeling stuff. And it's interesting because like, like I said, it's like, I don't know whether this stuff works. I mean, people clearly believe it works. And I know it does work. Like, you know, this guy's talking about like when you're talking about percentage points of things. But like, does it, like, if everyone starts doing it all the time, do those percentage effects start canceling out? Or do you start looking, you know, just sift the data ever finer to find the parts of the system that are still not being kind of monkeyed with? Or, you know, can you monkey with everything all the time? Or like, is there like the Eye of Sauron where like it's like, you know, it's looking at Frodo, but then here comes Aragorn up to the gates and the eye is torn away and it can look at Aragorn. Like, or is it like we're just like it can see everything all the time?
It makes me
we're
wonder
living in a
how...
point of history where we find out whether it works, or it's true or bullshit or what. It's exciting.
Yeah, exciting. That's how I describe it. I do wonder if the prequels go into any of the stuff about how Harry Seldon got psychohistory into the consciousness of so many people. Because, without a social media network, without like easy access to distribution of information, you would think that people with the levers of power and the money to influence people would be the people who could actually take advantage of a psychohistory-esque predictive model. I don't know. I'm super curious to get to those prequel novels to see if they deal with that, because it seems like a grassroots sort of movement that he's got going. But boy, how did he get that done?
Yeah, like what kind of, or because we don't get an opportunity to see like how the people, we're talking about the masses, the 8 trillion people, how they, because we've been looking at the very tippy top of even, you know, people in Trantor are living a completely different life than other parts of the galaxy. We've seen, the seat of a religious power that holds sway over 3 trillion people. And we've seen the backwaters of Anacreon and Terminus that, barely they're scrapping over nothing. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, yeah, what does TV and pop culture and advertisement look like in the Foundation world? We haven't seen that because none of the people that we have gotten to know are part of that consumption culture. So Daniel had a question for David Goyer that I've adapted into for our own purposes. We, of course, are not David S. Goyer, but we'll see what we can do. He says, one crucial detail in the world building of the Foundation is bothering me because of its lack of plausibility, because the way that it plays doesn't track with how I see the real world tracking. Brothers Dawn, Day, and Dusk are all playing their part in a generations-long system of succession in which the will of the individual clone is made subservient to the greater whole. If you've watched anything like The Crown, you've seen a good depiction of how our inherent individualism will chafe at the constraints of that kind of dynasty. Not everybody chooses to play their part. Rebellion and pushback are inevitable. In this case, however, we're dealing with literal copies of Cleon I. Cleon I was someone with an extraordinary force of will and a thirst for power to the extent that he subjugated an entire galaxy. This personality is not a worker bee's personality. He's not a team player. Everything in him drives him to seize control and dominate. Sociologists are in agreement that nurture is far less significant than nature. I don't know. People's genes are the significant drivers of their personalities, choices, and preferences. For this reason, I find it totally unbelievable that clones of a man with the conquering nature of an Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan would go along with the dynastic system that is depicted in the show. I don't think that system would last a single generation. The very first clone would balk at having his individuality watered down and given a name that reflects a particular part of the process, let alone gets walked to their own incineration. What do you make of this? The idea that like Cleon is such a fucking Chad that he's never going to do the virgin move of just walking off into a disintegration chamber at the behest of some robot woman.
I mean, the original one didn't. So there's that. Now
there's that.
There are a lot of assumptions being made here. I don't know what articles you've read, and I certainly haven't read very many about nature versus nurture. You're taking it on as a fact here that nature is much more important, and I don't know if that's true. I'm no expert though, so I'll say I don't know on that. I'm pretty sure Cleon is not the first emperor. Yes.
No, this is
the Empire wasn't created by Cleon. He might not be the Chad you think he is. He might just be a dude who was born into an already powerful dynasty and didn't have any, visions of grandeur beyond creating a star bridge. So he doesn't have to be like the Genghis Khan type.
That's true. This is a 400-year tip of the pinky on a 12,000-year Imperium.
Right.
It's just, this has been, I guess, an unprecedented area of prosperity and peace because they implied there's a lot of squabbling over succession. you know, and like just having all that, you know, figured out where you can peacefully transfer power from system to system. I mean, that's one of the successes of Western style democracies, is we kind of like figure out how to do that to the extent that everyone goes along with it. So, yeah.
And I guess the question is like, ultimately, look, this is part of the setup, right? You're either going to go along with the setup of this university as it exists and see what they have to say about that, or you're not going to be on board just because, you know, you don't think that this world could ever actually exist, which I don't think that the Lord of the Rings world could ever actually exist, but I still watched the movies and enjoyed them. So I don't know. Let's just go with the setup here and see if they have anything interesting to say about it as we progress.
Because that's a damn good point. Because Lord of the Rings world essentially says Aragorn should be king because he's just got better blood, y'all. He's just a better dude. He's from better stock, from more descendant from the pure blood that was blessed by Eru, the creator himself. You know, I'm like, I don't believe any of that shit.
I believe that world could exist. I believe that world did exist for a long time.
Yeah.
Also,
that was the way a lot of tyrants pulled the wool over people's eyes and kept them down. But yeah, I don't know. And also about, like, I'm not a sociologist myself, but it's my understanding that, like, what sociologists say now is, like, nature and nurture are so intertwined that to try to study anything in isolation when it comes to something as complex as human society is like, you know, almost fruitless. Like, you can't.
I mean, what do you need?
It's not
identical twins to start? I mean, once we start cloning, I think we could do some really, like, fucked up
unethical shit,
stuff that would get us there, but I don't know if we're gonna let it.
Devise some experience that would make Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan blush. We're gonna get so fucked up with these clone twins. And the other thing is, like, as you say, like, is this working? Because it does seem like, you know, one of the Beetle the Beetle sociologist, ecologist that we've alluded to twice now in the podcast, one of his big theories is that political unrest comes from when the elite class in a society gets bored with not enough to do, and there's too many of them, so they can't distinguish themselves. Like if an empire has so many
show about this,
so many princes that not all of them can have castles and important titles, and they start, you know, getting bored and have delusions of grandeur and start shitting in the system instead of shitting out, you have a big problem. And that's what he's predicting. He's like, that, you know, we have so emphasized getting college degrees and bettering ourselves and, you know, having a certain amount of wealth and power that not everyone can possibly have in a society. So now we've got people with college degrees that think they should get 100K and they can only get an entry-level job. And that's going to inevitably cause the system to collapse. Like I said, I don't know. I feel like human society is more complicated than Beatles. So I don't know if this is all necessarily true, but, you know, I think that going back to this email, like, it could be the thesis of the show that this isn't working.
Yes.
It's worked for 400 years with an immortal android that is molding these people into a shape with this expectations of 8 trillion people on them to fit a particular mold. And they are chafing and it is breaking. This is like a very unnatural system. But it can, with the full might of an empire behind it, they can keep banging these guys into the proper shape. So, like I said, I think that's interesting.
Here is that, these clones have existed and they're the same. The breaking of the mold here is happening before our eyes, right?
Right. That's how I see it anyway. So, Chris sends in a missive, says, I just had to shout out Terrence Mann, who plays Brother Dusk. His voice nearly perfectly matches that of Lee Pace's, and his performance through the first 5 episodes has been awesome. I don't know if either of you realize this, but Terrence Mann is a Broadway veteran of countless musicals, and by way of example, if you've ever listened to the original soundtrack of Les Mis or Beauty and the Beast, Terrence Mann is the original Javert and the Beast, respectfully. I had no idea that, of course, I've listened to the Les Mis soundtrack many times. I had no idea that this is Javert.
Never listened to either of those.
Of course. Maybe this is why I find his voice performance matching Lee so intriguing. He also follows Jonathan Pryce's High Sparrow from the Game of Thrones as a musical stage actor, landing in the realm of sci-fi high fantasy. Of course, Jonathan Pryce, famous for being General Perron in the at least the movie make of Evita. the movie version of Evita with Madonna. That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like for these type of roles, which are big and larger than life, you can't hardly beat someone with stage play experience, because that's the opposite of the method style of acting. That's acting big. That's projecting on a huge scale, on a huge stage, to the people in the back seats. And that's kind of what the Emperor is all about. You have to take a stage and project yourself from Trantor to the ends of the known universe. It makes a lot of sense that these guys with these presences fit these things like peas in a pod. J.J. Johnson has a simple explanation for Salvor's ability to guess the outcome of the coin toss. We all believe that she's the biological daughter of Gale. I don't know if we all do, but it's looking that way. Just before Gale jumped through the first wormhole in episode 1, her traveling companion pointed out that you had to remain asleep or your body and mind would get unsynced. He's then taking that and assuming that this out of sync body and mind can get passed on genetically. So Salvor's consciousness is essentially a couple of seconds ahead of the reality her body and mind is experiencing. So when she flips a coin, she intuitively knows the outcome before it's flipped. Unfortunately, his analysis is this is only slightly useful because she can only foretell a couple of seconds ahead of real time. Could make you good at party tricks or a better fighter, but that's about it. Do you agree with J.J. Johnson's analysis here?
I might be able to. That seems like a plausible, I don't know, theory to tack on to the already not quite proven theory that we've got. Yeah.
The only challenge I have to it is how does it explain Salvor's ability to divine the truth of what's going on in Farah's mental state and her past? It seems like she was pretty accurate at telling exactly. I mean,
maybe she's seeing the past through someone else's eyes, like the vision she has of Raish.
That's still not just a displaced mind and body.
No.
Or maybe it is.
I mean, it could be if you're unstuck from time, maybe.
Yeah,
but you're
like
also unstuck
but then
from
your
your physical. Yeah, a lot of questions.
But I guess then you're talking about more than just a few seconds of being unstuck too.
Yeah,
but it is, like I said, it is possible. I just don't know how it fits in with it. I mean, we even said this in our coverage of the show. She could be just cold reading, like one of those psychics that talks to dead people, right? It's like, oh, I'm getting an uncle. Oh, I had an aunt that died. I'm an aunt. It's a definite feminine energy, and her name was Gladys. Her name was Irene. Yes, that's close to the G in the alphabet. It's like they could just be doing that because everyone knows about what happened in Anacreons, and she is the first huntress, so she's real high up in that society. So she probably was at the forefront of destruction and also at the loss of. So yeah, but why would the show be playing that tricksy with us? I think the plain reading is she's got some precognition. We don't know how strong, how accurate. So
we don't know the source of it. So I think it's fair to speculate, but I just don't know.
Feels like we're getting closer and closer to these types of answers, though.
Yeah.
Feels like the show just keeps on spiraling in towards some version of the truth of, the Sasquatch ice cave nature of the vault and all that. So let's move on to Arcade Shenanigans. As I just want to drop this as a point of appreciation for Foundation this week and its great use of tension. The scene in which Brother Day's ship entered the atmosphere and landed on the Maiden. The choice of ship speed and lingering on that landing process, I couldn't help but feel that it's a trap type tension after seeing the relative ease in which the Anacreons destroyed a seemingly identical ship in the previous episode. It's a great way to build the initial shared distrust between the Emperor and the viewer with Halima. Also, having been pulled into a few cross-cultural ceremonies from religions where I was an outsider, I really appreciated the don't bow. Great. Now I'm the only one standing. I better own it moment with Day later in this episode. I appreciated that, too. I've been a couple times, like, when I left my own religion and I was like, am I going to be religious or spiritual? Or I tried a couple of different religious ceremonies just to see how it would feel. And yeah, like I remember one time going to a Lutheran ceremony and they ask everybody to come partake of the I don't know, the bread and the wine or the wafers or whatever, and everyone stands up as unison, and I'm like, should I? Like, I'm technically baptized, but would they consider I'm baptized? And then by the time I was like everyone had just started filing into the line, so I was like, well, now, and I looked around, and I'm literally the only one in the whole fucking building that's not lining up for the blessing. So, yeah, a little bit on a very small scale, what Day was feeling there, and probably this stuff like the how do you say that word? The verisimilitude, the real life, I
think.
Yeah, I wonder if that's coming from the mixed religious heritage of the guy running the show.
Yeah, totally could.
Probably a lot in the writing room there too.
I didn't pick up on that tension, but you're right. After you pointed it out, I'm like, oh yeah, that should be all over this scene.
I'm very curious to see what kind of price that Demerzel pays for this, or what kind of loss of faith. I want to
see the consequences.
Yeah, especially since they really painted Day as very adolescent and childlike in his behavior this episode. Irish Monk says, one thing I've noticed in this series is some quite subtle and clever within scene analogs. Most recently in the opening of episode 6, Brother Day asked Demerzel what it's like to be awake during a star or hyperjump. She replies that she cannot tell him because his mind would break because the human mind cannot tolerate the discontinuity. He goes on to ask her to explain her faith in luminism, and she replies that luminism teaches that at any point, an individual has a power to choose their own path. The truth is that this teaching also breaks his mind because to the clone mind, the Cleon dynasty cannot tolerate discontinuity. Demerzel is prepared to test his mind on issues of faith, but not on issues of science and technology. Perhaps this is because there's more to this process of humans going to sleep during star or hyperjumps than meets the eye. Remember, Gale woke during her trip. All right, you have any thoughts on this? Does it give us any clues to Demerzel's strategy or the resentment of AIs for being eradicated by the Empire? I don't know about the latter thing. It is interesting that you hinted on the fact that she's not willing to. That scene reminded me so much of Spock and McCoy in the whale movie of Star Trek, where McCoy sidles up to Spock and he wants to ask him. It's like, what was death like? What's it like? And Spock's like, well, to have a discussion, we have to have a common frame of reference. He's like, are you saying that I have to die to hear your thoughts on death? And Spock's like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, the whole individuality is something that it's not true that for this individual she's talking about that he has the opportunity to do whatever he wants or to make a decision outside of his station, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think he would have the agency if he chose to exert it, but that's not the path that he's on. And the other thing about it is I think this is just a foreshadowing or a setup for when she bows later to the religion, right? This is the question, where do her loyalties lie, really? Do they lie with Luminism or do they lie with the Empire? And the Empire is the thing that's on the path that's unmovable, unchangeable. And then you've got this religion where you need to be that. So I think that's what they're doing there. I don't know that I would go beyond that, but maybe.
Maybe she is trying to get him to, like, because we've all thought that she is not really serving the Empire the way I think the Empire would understand serving him, the be. Like, she's got some kind of ulterior motive. So maybe she is trying to get him to take some kind of drastic individual action. And she's like, but she's got to pick her moment, like she gets too close to the source. There's too much, I don't know, of the original. That's where this clone stuff starts breaking down, which we'll get into later in the feedback. But
okay.
Sewell says, I was thinking along the lines when Aaron was talking about the genetic drift of the Cleon clones. Is it known that they've taken genetic material from Cleon to Uno, or is it something Brother Dust does before ascending to Brother Darkness? Because that seems more likely why, as the line continues, they seem to get less impressive. You have the copy of a copy effect. I think we talked about this, that we don't really know. Mm-hmm. It is interesting that they keep, apparently, the body of Cleon the First in perfect stasis. Mm-hmm. That maybe, that seems like it'd be the smart thing to do, is to always, sample from the original.
Yeah, imagine how much genetic material there is there. I mean, the number of generations would just be infinite.
Yeah. And I that's the thing, because, like, you know, when I grew up, that was a common thing of cloning. Like, there's like 2 different Star Trek The Next Generation episodes revolving around a society of clones that needed to steal children from the Enterprise, or steal Riker and Crusher's genetic material, because they were just getting that copy of a copy of a copy effect, where they're starting to kind of like inbreeding in the royal families. You start getting the massive overbites and the madness of King George and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's scientific. Or if that's scientism, like if that's like, you know, like it sounds good for a Star Trek episode, or if that's because, like, if you make a clone, like, this isn't Jurassic Park where it's like, well, we have, I don't know, 99% of a Tyrannosaurus and we're going to plug the missing stuff with frog DNA. Like, you got the whole sequence. Like, right. Do the copies of that go wrong? Like when they're making copies of Dolly the sheep when I was growing up, or every generation of Dolly got dumber and dumber. Like, they're sheep. How the fuck would you know? Right.
No, I think that would be come down to your process, right? Not the material itself. The material should,
true, unless
there are mutations that happen over the course of time. You would always have the same genetic material. It's identical. That's what cloning is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you copy an MP3 from one space to another, you don't run the risk of the file corrupting. I mean, I guess you do.
God, my M&M track turned into Cotton Eye Joe. Shit, again?
Yeah, what the fuck? What kind of drift is this? Yeah, now if you re-encode it, something could go wrong, and, you know, if you're, I guess, a physical flaw in the medium happens. But, like, yeah, if you make a copy, that's why fucking everybody's so pissed off when they started doing it. It's like, well, this is just exactly. It's like, yeah, this is exactly the same thing you're buying, except for free. So. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how the cloning technology works out. Tommy, was Selden's claim to Raish that if he and Gale stay together, the plan falls apart an unforced error? Harry made it very clear that he can't predict things at an individual level, so how can he make claims about Raish and Gale? One of my friends that is a book reader highlights that point as one of the many reasons the show is turning them off, since it's putting Harry in a position of predicting and accounting for an individual in his plan. As a book reader myself, I'm trying not to bring too many expectations into the show, since it's clearly a very different story, but I couldn't really argue against it seeming like an error. Do you think this is in fact an error by the show, or something we don't understand yet?
Well, I think, like, take a step back from the individuals here and look at the roles of the people involved, right? Harry's saying to Raish, like, look, I can't kill myself. This can't be a suicide, right? This has to be a murder by someone who escapes. That's all he's saying. He's not saying that it has to be Gale. He's not saying that it has to be Raish. It just needs to be, I was murdered and that person was not found.
And these are like the border issues between what we're talking about in the Conception, that he couldn't predict that Gale and Raish would be together, but he can see what effect that has on the Foundation and predict that if they stay together, seemingly the probabilities of success for the Foundation plummet to almost nothing. So, like, he can't predict what Raish and Gale will do, but he can predict what a suitably large number of a population will react to that. And I even had that question in the first episode, like, is the Foundation, because clearly that's what they're doing, running these simulations. They're trying to, like, you know, maybe that's the thing. They get such a huge sample size of behavior from a relatively small population. Maybe they can, but, like, I had that question of, like, is there enough people on this fucking ship that you can make a useful prediction about what's going to happen on Terminus? You know? So this is kind of like the gray area between, he's not predicting the action of an individual, but he's saying what this variable will do to this other larger population. And, you know, if that's putting you off because you're a strict book reader, then, I mean, fair enough. But, like, also, there's so many things up in the air. The fact that this isn't, strictly speaking, Harry's plan anymore. Raish went and fucked it up. Or I guess Gale did, because she had precognition that something was wrong and went and spoiled the murder-suicide, right? So, like,
yeah.
we're already like several kind of pages off of the books, and they're clearly doing something that's related. And it might, this is something that I thought the Double D's did very well in the first few seasons of the Game of Thrones, where like in the middle of the season, I'm like, fuck, this is so much different from the books. I don't know. But like, they don't have to directly adhere to every book, right? They just have to get the shape of the world close enough that when they wrap up this season, that it will mesh with the ongoing story. So like one of the things that Double D's did is like, no matter what, at the end of every season, everything kind of collapsed back into a shape of like, oh, I see, this guy's doing this thing, and this is going to be the one that does this in the books. And like, I can see how this, Game of Thrones is going to hand off to a Clash of Kings or whatever for next season. And they could be doing that, where it's like there's lots of different things. Yeah. But, when you finally open up the vault and you see what's in it, oh, this is going to connect to the next sequence of the Foundation. I see that now. I can't see that now, right, strictly speaking, where we're standing from.
Sure.
Let's move on to Dan. Wait a second. Yeah. Let's move on to Dan. It says East Asians comprise. They comprise approximately 1/4 of the Earth's present population, which tracks with historical estimates going back for thousands of years. That percent is roughly on par with South Asian and European percentiles. So my question is, where are all the East Asians in the Galactic Empire? I'm mainly concerned with accuracy concerning the portions of our phenotypes out in our species. I think so. This is something that came up on the AMA that Goyer did on Reddit. That like clearly, I think Goyer and the whole studio here is trying to represent a galactic universe that closely resembles the current makeup of Earth. Like it's not just all white folk and that, right? But I heard that one of the challenges they had is that in the places they were filming during COVID, getting people across the borders, they had lots of certain types of phenotypes, as you say, that were at their fingertips at casting calls and things. And some were harder to get. And I guess East Asians were one of the ones that's like, you had to move people around across borders that were closed. And that's why there's still, the one lady who had zygote harvesting hesitancy was East Asian. I think there's been at least one more on Terminus. But that's according to Goyer, that's one of the reasons they were so represented because they couldn't quite get the diverse mix that they wanted. And, we'll see if that gets ameliorated, that gets tweaked going in seasons forward. Because I said clearly, I feel like that they want to have that. I mean, if you look at the cast and the makeup of it is pretty diverse. Okay. I have one more question, and it's more on the kind of like book future spoilers, kind of like an add-on to our conversation that Jim and I had at the end of last week or of this week's episode, the spoiler edition of it. So if you don't want any kind of like book kind of topics, you don't want that to taint your enjoyment of the show, I very much encourage you to turn off the podcast now. You can send in feedback to foundation@baldmove.com. We appreciate everybody's questions, and we look forward to having you back for the 7th episode. That's going to be dropping again this Friday, same time the Apple releases it. We will try to get it out at the scheduled time, but they got it out a couple of hours earlier. Right. This
I
week.
drop it when I notice the episode has come out on Thursday night because they never wait until Friday at 3 a.m.
Yeah, they give us an embargo date that's always several hours after the episode eventually gets out. So anyway, just be looking at baldmove.com, subscribe to Foundation of Podcast, Bald Move Pulp, however you want to get it in your favorite podcast app, or also youtube.com/baldmove. We're also putting video versions of our podcasts up there. All right. Once again, foundation@baldmove.com. I think everyone's had enough time to exit the building if that's what they want to do. So let's talk about Joel. Joel corrects me because I've been saying there's this character of the Mule and these people that have, like, I've broadly referred to it as psychic powers, future telling powers. And I've gotten this I've gotten this wrong. My recollections of this. It says the Mule didn't have the ability to see in the future. What they did have is the ability to manipulate the emotions of other humans. Described as the ability to essentially twist an emotional dial and have it set at a different direction. That's what gave him the power to start conquering the Foundation, sometimes with little to no opposition.
Okay.
So this is I thought that this guy had precog or psychic powers. They were more of a telepath. He could read minds and he could affect people's. He's an empath. Affect their emotions. And that's something that the psychohistory could not account for. The fact that people could have their base desires in mass fucked with and manipulated. And the third book is largely about how do you account for and how can a man like Carrie account for the unaccountable, the knowing the unknowable.
So is this gonna be like a combination of what Gale experienced with the jump, with her, consciousness slipping in time, and a combination of the mule's powers manifesting in Hardin?
It's possible,
because what she's described about like she wants to kill them all, like that anger and stuff, that is very much like sensing the emotions of a character.
True, and that also kind of fits into her intuitive sense of what Farah went through, rather than just like she's literally reading her mind and she's like seeing things and how they emotionally resonate and things like that. So maybe it's also possible that they're just going to change the mule to update it to like, we live in a world that has tons and tons and tons of psychic stories and mind manipulation, and that he's just going to change it to where it's a little bit like that, because empath changing people's emotions, like I'm trying to think of like how many things I've seen of that in fiction. It's a little bit more of a, like this is a pre-X-Men concept of how mind powers would work. This is like something that came up with. And there's other things that have come. I just like, they're not using atomics and fusion drive. They're using black hole fucking technology. It's been updated. But on the other end, that just might be trying to be right, even though I've been wrong. So
I was going to say, it's even if they don't do that, it's still pretty interesting, right? It's a limitation on the power that could be even more interesting than just having straight up mind control or the ability to read people's memories or thoughts.
It's a lot more subtle. How that would interface. So I just wanted to make sure I got that click, because again, this was something I was trying to remember. It's stuff I have from like 20 plus 25, 30-year-old memories of reading these books and what they're doing, which seems very much like some kind of precognition. So I got those overwritten. But yeah, like I said, I think there's room for both of that to be true too, because like Jim pointed out, what Salvor is doing feels very, very much empathetic, channeling other people's emotions. And maybe that's why that she's always been seen as off, even though they didn't know her true bizarre powers, that like, that's just like someone that's that in tune is uncanny and off-putting.
Or imagine if you had the ability to affect other people's emotions, but you didn't know it. Like, what would you be projecting, right? Like, how would that mess with the people around you? And they'd feel weird when they were around you. I don't like her because she makes me feel weird. Yeah.
So anyway, I appreciate the clarification, Joel. A couple people sent this in, but Joel was the first one, so I went with their email. Once again, foundation@baldmove.com is how you send us your thoughts. We will be back with another episode next week. And of course, we'll have full coverage of episode 7 as soon as Apple TV Plus deigns to drop it in our TV polls. So that's it. That's it for Foundation of Podcast. Thanks for all the emails. Thanks for the support. We'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jim.
Later.